I woke up buried under plaster dust with my cheek pressed against a hardwood floor I knew I'd replaced the day before. For a second, I thought the ceiling had collapsed. Then I looked up. The ceiling wasn't damaged. It was new. Fresh white paint stretched overhead without a single crack. The water stains I'd spent 12 hours scraping away were gone. The rotten beams I'd sistered together with reclaimed pine looked like they'd just come out of a sawmill. Even the old brass light fixture I'd boxed up for restoration hung perfectly centered above me, polished until it reflected my face. I stumbled to my feet so fast I nearly blacked out. No. The word came out before I realized I was speaking. I'd demolished this room. I'd photographed every inch for documentation. The floor had been warped. The walls had been split. The windows had been boarded shut. None of that was true anymore. Outside, something screamed. Not an animal. Not a person. Just one long, ragged sound that echoed through the empty streets until it disappeared beneath the wind. That's when my radio crackled. Sunrise in 4 minutes. Static. Then another voice. Whatever you do, don't let the buildings finish. The transmission cut off. 4 minutes. I ran to the front door. It wouldn't open. The deadbolt I'd removed yesterday was somehow back in place. Brand new. I grabbed my pry bar. The steel bent before the lock did. Behind me, upstairs. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Like someone walking through a house that hadn't had a living occupant in 70 years. Only I was supposed to be alone. My name's Evan Mercer. Before all this happened, I restored historic buildings across the western United States. Old mining towns. Abandoned rail depots. Churches everyone else considered beyond saving. If it had history and was falling apart, there was a good chance my company got the contract. I'd spent almost 15 years crawling through unstable roofs, replacing century-old foundations, and convincing investors that forgotten places still mattered. People always asked why I liked restoration. The answer was simple. Old buildings told the truth. You could read every repair, every fire, every flood, every generation that tried to leave something behind. Nothing stayed hidden forever. At least, that's what I believed before Blackridge. Officially, Blackridge wasn't a ghost town. According to state records, it was listed as an active historical preservation district. According to satellite imagery, it barely existed. Half the map showed empty desert. The other half showed streets that didn't match each other. I didn't think much of that at the time. Government databases screw up all the time. The contract arrived by certified mail. No company logo. No agency name. Just a thick envelope containing architectural surveys, structural reports, and a payment offer that made me read the page 3 times. $3 million. For 6 weeks. No bidding process. No negotiations. Everything paid in advance. There was only one requirement. I had to work alone. That should have been my first red flag. The second was the NDA. Most non-disclosure agreements are boring legal documents. This one included pages about behavioral compliance, mandatory curfew, restricted observation periods, unauthorized photography. It even had a clause that said I acknowledged naturally occurring structural anomalies. I actually laughed when I read that. I figured it was legal language covering unstable buildings. My lawyer called me an hour later. I've never seen anything like this. So don't sign it. Why? I can't explain why. Silence. Then he said something I'd never heard from him before. It feels like someone wrote laws around something instead of people. I signed it anyway. $3 million buys a lot of confidence. 2 weeks later, I drove into Blackridge. The highway ended without warning. No welcome sign. No historical marker. Just a rusted cattle gate hanging open beside a faded wooden post. Blackridge. Population unknown. Someone had scratched away the original number. The town sat inside a shallow valley surrounded by dry hills that looked burned even though nothing had caught fire in years. Every building faced the center street. Hotel. Schoolhouse. General store. Sheriff's office. Church. Dozens of homes. Everything frozen somewhere around 1912. Except, nothing looked abandoned. There wasn't graffiti. No broken bottles. No vandalism. No trees growing through roofs. The buildings were deteriorating exactly as if time itself had been carefully measured. Rot stopped halfway through beams. Paint peeled in neat patterns. Windows cracked but never shattered. Like decay had rules. I parked outside the old hotel. The silence hit me immediately. Ghost towns aren't quiet. They're full of insects. Wind. Birds. Small animals. Blackridge had none of that. Just the sound of my truck cooling in the afternoon heat. A man stepped onto the hotel porch before I unloaded my tools. Late 60s. Gray work clothes. Clean boots. Perfect posture. He looked more like an engineer than a caretaker. You made good time. You must be my client. No. He smiled politely. I'm your supervisor. He held out a hand. Calvin. His grip felt strangely cold despite the heat. You'll be staying in the hotel. I figured. Second floor. Fine. You'll work sunrise until sunset. Standard enough. You will never perform restoration after sunset. I laughed. I usually don't. I'm not joking. His expression never changed. You stop when the sun touches the western ridge. He pointed toward the mountains. Not 5 minutes later. Okay. You will lock every door before dark. Sure. You will close every curtain. No problem. You will not look outside between midnight and sunrise. I blinked. Excuse me? He ignored the question. If you hear construction outside. He paused. Do not investigate. I waited for him to smile. He didn't. If someone knocks. Another pause. They already know you're inside. The breeze picked up. For the first time since arriving, I heard something. Hammering. Very faint. Somewhere across town. Tap. 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 Like distant carpentry. Calvin looked toward the sound without reacting. One more thing. What? No matter what condition you leave a building in. He looked directly into my eyes. Begin every morning with a fresh inspection. Because? Because it won't be the same building. He turned and walked away. No explanation. No paperwork. No goodbye. Just gone. I stood there for nearly a minute before realizing I'd never heard his footsteps fade. The hotel was exactly what I'd expected from a forgotten mining town. Dust. Warped stairs. Collapsed plaster. A leaking roof over the eastern hallway. My room overlooked the entire main street. Every important building sat within view. Perfect for planning work. Inside the room, someone had already stocked supplies. Water. Canned food. Medical kit. Flashlights. Extra batteries. Even replacement tools. Everything was neatly organized. On the desk sat a leather binder. No title. Inside were daily work logs dating back almost 30 years. Every page followed the same format. Inspector. Date. Assigned structure. Observed condition. Recommended repairs. The handwriting changed every few years. Different inspectors. Different names. But one sentence appeared in every single notebook. Morning condition differs from previous evening documentation. Every single day. At first I assumed it referred to weather damage. Animals. Humidity. Then I noticed something else. The photographs. One inspector documented a collapsed church steeple. The next morning, the steeple was standing again. Another photographed burned flooring inside the school. Next page. Perfect hardwood. Someone even documented replacing every window in the general store. The following morning, every replacement window had vanished. Original cracked glass had returned. I checked the metadata. Different dates. Different cameras. No obvious manipulation. It had to be a prank. An expensive one. I was still convincing myself of that when I heard the hammering again. Louder this time. Not one hammer. Dozens. Coming from somewhere beyond the church. I checked my watch. 6:14 p.m. Sunset was still almost an hour away. The sound stopped all at once. Not faded. Stopped. Like every hammer struck one final nail together. That night, I chose the old hotel first for restoration. If I was living there, I wanted the roof stabilized before anything else. The work was routine. Replace damaged joists. Reinforce the attic. Install temporary supports. By sunset, I'd finished enough to sleep without worrying about the second floor collapsing. As the last strip of sunlight disappeared behind the western ridge, my radio buzzed. Cease restoration. A voice I'd never heard. Calm. Professional. Secure all entrances. I rolled my eyes. Whoever was watching this place took the rules seriously. Still, I locked every door. Closed every curtain. Double-checked every window. Mostly because I didn't feel like arguing with whoever was paying me. Dinner was canned chili heated over a portable stove. I reviewed tomorrow's plans while listening to the wind. Except, it wasn't wind. I froze. Tap. 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 A hammer. Outside. Then another. Then 20 more. Soon the entire town sounded alive. Saws. Dragging lumber. Nails. Glass breaking. Voices too muffled to understand. It sounded exactly like a full construction crew working through the night. My phone had no signal. The radio remained silent. I walked halfway to the window before remembering Calvin's warning. Do not look outside between midnight and sunrise. It wasn't midnight yet. I checked the clock. 11:58 p.m. The hammering grew louder. Closer. Right outside the hotel. Something heavy scraped across the porch. Then came the unmistakable sound of someone climbing the front steps. 1, 2, 3. Slow. Deliberate. Stopping outside the front entrance. A knock echoed through the building. 3 slow raps. Not loud. Confident. I held my breath. Another knock. Then a voice. Clear enough to hear through 2 floors of old timber. Evan. My blood ran cold. No one here should have known my first name except Calvin. The voice spoke again. You forgot the east staircase. I hadn't told anyone I'd reinforced the east staircase that afternoon. No one had watched me work. At least, I didn't think anyone had. The knock came a third time. This time, another voice joined it. Then another. Then another. All of them spoke at once. Each using my voice. Evan. We're almost finished. Come outside. We only need one more repair. Then, directly beneath my bedroom window, a hammer struck wood. Once. Twice. 3 times. And from somewhere inside the hotel. Above my room. Someone answered with 3 identical knocks. Above me. 3 slow knocks. Not frantic. Not loud. Measured. Like whoever, or whatever, was upstairs wasn't responding to the voices outside. It was acknowledging them. I didn't move. Every instinct I'd developed over 15 years working inside unstable buildings screamed at me to find the source. That's what contractors do. You hear something in a structure, you investigate it before it becomes a collapse. But Calvin's rules kept replaying in my head. Do not investigate construction after sunset. The hammering outside continued. Steady. Rhythmic. It sounded organized now. Not random repairs. A job site. A crew following a blueprint. Then I heard something that made every hair on my arm stand up. Someone dragged a tape measure across the front porch. The metallic hiss echoed through the hotel. I knew that sound. Every contractor knows it. A tape measure snapping back into its housing. Whoever was outside. They were taking measurements. The footsteps upstairs began again. They crossed the hallway directly over my room. Then stopped. Silence. A floorboard creaked. Another. The weight shifted. It felt like someone was standing directly above my bed, listening. The radio exploded with static. A new voice cut through. Male. Breathing hard. If you hear them measuring. The transmission dissolved into crackling. Don't let them finish your room. Static swallowed the rest. Then nothing. I stared at the radio. The battery indicator hadn't moved. No channel number. No frequency. Just static. Outside, the knocking stopped. The construction noises stopped. Everything stopped. The silence was somehow worse. I don't remember falling asleep. At some point, exhaustion won. When I opened my eyes, sunlight poured through the curtains. Birds were singing. For one beautiful second, I convinced myself the entire night had been stress. Then I noticed the smell. Fresh cut pine. Linseed oil. Wet plaster. I threw the curtains open. My stomach dropped. The porch I'd walked across yesterday had been half rotten. Now it looked newly built. Fresh lumber. Fresh nails. Fresh paint. Even the support posts were perfectly square. Across the street, the sheriff's office had a brand new front staircase. The church roof no longer sagged. The blacksmith's shop had windows. Not replacement windows. Original wavy glass that looked over a century old but somehow spotless. It was as if an invisible restoration crew had worked all night. Only, they'd restored everything to an earlier version of itself. Not modern. Not improved. Historical. Exactly as it would have looked decades ago. I rushed downstairs. The front door swung open without resistance. The bent pry bar I'd left beside it was gone. In its place leaned an old wooden-handled hammer. Stamped into the steel head were 3 words. Property of Blackridge. I picked it up. It was warm. Like someone had been using it minutes earlier. Calvin was waiting outside. He wasn't surprised to see me. You slept. I don't think that's the important part. He ignored that. Morning inspection? I pointed across the street. The buildings? Yes. They've been repaired. Yes. Who did it? You'll write your report first. I'm asking a question. And you'll receive instructions after your report. His tone never changed. Like he genuinely couldn't understand why I wanted answers before paperwork. I spent the next hour inspecting the hotel. Everything I'd repaired yesterday was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The support braces had disappeared. My replacement joists were missing. The cracked originals were back. Except they weren't cracked anymore. They looked untouched. Even my pencil marks used for measurements had vanished. The only evidence I'd ever worked there was a pile of modern lumber stacked outside. And used. Exactly where I'd unloaded it. I checked my photos. Yesterday's images still showed the damage. Today's photos showed something completely different. Same angles. Same lighting. Different building. I compared nail holes. Window frames. Foundation stones. Nothing matched. It wasn't that the building had repaired itself. It was older. As though the hotel had decided yesterday never happened. Inside the binder, I began my first official report. Before I finished the second page, I noticed another envelope tucked beneath the desk. It hadn't been there last night. No stamp. No handwriting. Just my name. Evan Mercer. Inside was a single typed page. Field Notice 14. If a structure presents evidence of unauthorized restoration, remove all modern materials before sunset. Do not leave contemporary construction inside historical boundaries. The town rejects incompatible chronology. Persistent rejection events will escalate. Do not attempt to preserve yesterday. No signature. No letterhead. Nothing. I flipped the page over. Blank. When I looked back, one sentence had appeared near the bottom. I watched the ink spread across the paper. like invisible hands were writing it. They are correcting your mistakes. I dropped the page. When I picked it up again, the sentence was gone. By noon, I convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Someone was entering every building overnight, replacing materials, moving equipment. It sounded impossible. But impossible made more sense than haunted architecture. I decided to test it. The general store sat 2 blocks west of the hotel. Its front porch leaned nearly 6 inches toward the street. I measured everything, photographed every board, marked hidden locations with tiny UV paint dots only visible under black light. Then I removed a damaged support beam. Instead of installing a replacement, I locked the original beam inside a steel job box. Industrial grade. 2 padlocks. I kept both keys. If the beam disappeared overnight, I'd know something impossible had happened. While I worked, I noticed movement in one of the second-floor windows across the street. Just a shadow. I waved. No response. Probably Calvin. Watching. Again. Around 3 in the afternoon, I found the first thing that didn't belong. Behind the general store sat an old pickup truck. Late 1980s model. Covered in dust. The driver's door hung open. Inside, the keys were still in the ignition. The registration belonged to a man named Daniel Brooks. Occupation: historical preservation specialist. Exactly my job. In the glove compartment I found a small notebook. Most pages were weather observations, supply lists, repair schedules. Then the handwriting changed. It became frantic. Day 6. The repairs aren't permanent. Every sunrise resets them. Day 8. I saw workers after midnight. They had no faces. Just shadows beneath hard hats. Day 11. Calvin says don't interfere. Calvin is lying. Day 13. The buildings aren't repairing themselves. They're remembering themselves. The remaining pages had been ripped out. I searched the truck for anything else. Under the passenger seat sat a cassette recorder. No batteries. I borrowed some from my flashlight. Press play. Static. Then a man's exhausted voice. If anyone finds this. Heavy breathing. Don't restore the church. A loud metallic bang interrupted him. They're using it. Static. To measure. Another bang. Then shouting. Not one person. Many. All speaking at once. The recording distorted. For just a second, every voice merged into one impossible sentence. We only rebuild what belongs. The tape snapped. The recorder shut off. On my way back to the hotel, I noticed something I could have sworn hadn't been there before. A small white house at the end of Oak Street. Fresh curtains. Fresh paint. A rocking chair on the porch. Yesterday, that lot had been empty. I checked my arrival photos. Nothing. Just weeds. Now there was a house. I walked toward it. Halfway across the yard, my radio burst to life. Evan. Calvin. Leave immediately. I found a building. I know. It wasn't here yesterday. I know. What is it? Long silence. Then, it isn't finished remembering. The transmission ended. I stood there another few seconds. The front door of the little house creaked open by itself. No wind. No one visible. Just darkness inside. Something moved behind the doorway. Not stepping forward. Stepping backward. Like someone silently inviting me in. I almost went. Then I noticed fresh footprints leading onto the porch. Only one set? They went inside. None came back out. I backed away. The front door slowly closed. Without a sound. That evening, Calvin met me outside the hotel again. You entered Oak Street. You've been watching me all day. Answer the question. I walked onto the property. Did you cross the threshold? No. For the first time, he looked relieved. You'll keep working tomorrow. Keep working? What does that mean? He looked past me toward the hills. The last 3 inspectors crossed thresholds. And? They're still employed. What the hell does that mean? He met my eyes. You'll understand if you survive your first week. Then he walked away. Again. Never explaining anything. Never looking back. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to obey every rule blindly. If something was happening after dark, I needed proof. Real proof. I set up 4 battery-powered trail cameras. One facing the hotel porch. One covering Main Street. One inside the hotel lobby. One overlooking the general store where I'd locked away the original support beam. Each camera had infrared recording. Motion activation. Independent batteries. No wireless connection. Nothing anyone could hack remotely. At 7:58 p.m., the sun slipped behind the western ridge. At exactly 8 o'clock, every camera clicked on. I locked every door. Closed every curtain. Sat at the desk with a notebook. The first hammer strike came at 11:41. Earlier than the night before. By 11:50 the entire town was alive again. Saws. Hammers. Voices. Wagons rolling over wooden streets. Church bells. Children laughing. None of those sounds should have existed in an abandoned town. Midnight arrived. Then came something new. Not knocking. Singing. Soft at first. Dozens of voices outside the hotel. Singing an old hymn I couldn't quite recognize. The melody drifted through the walls like it was being carried on fog instead of air. The lyrics were almost impossible to make out. Except for the last line, repeated over and over until it sounded less like a song and more like a promise. Before the sun, every home remembers. The singing stopped so abruptly that it felt like someone had cut power to the entire town. Silence. Absolute silence. I looked at the clock. 12:17 a.m. Every instinct in my body wanted to check the cameras. Instead, I sat perfectly still. The trail camera monitors were connected to portable DVR units, sitting on the desk beside me. They weren't streaming live. I had deliberately avoided anything wireless. But they showed a tiny status light whenever motion was being recorded. All 4 lights were flashing. Constantly. Something was moving in front of every camera. At the same time. That shouldn't have been possible. The hotel camera overlooked the porch. The general store camera was nearly a quarter-mile away. The lobby camera faced inward. Main Street stretched between them. No single person could trigger all 4 simultaneously. The lights kept blinking. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Nearly a full minute. Then, every light went solid. Recording stopped. The hymn began again. Only now. It was coming from inside the hotel. I don't embarrass easily. I've worked inside condemned buildings during earthquakes. I've watched walls collapse 6 feet away. I've had roofs fail while I was standing underneath them. Nothing has ever frozen me the way those voices did. They weren't downstairs. They weren't upstairs. They sounded like they were inside the walls. As if the old timber itself had learned to sing. The voices weren't loud. If anything, that made them worse. Dozens of people whispering the same melody through layers of wood and plaster. Then the melody changed. No words. Just humming. Slow. Patient. Waiting. The floor beneath my boots vibrated. Not from footsteps. From impact. Somewhere below, someone swung a hammer into a wall. Once. Twice. 3 times. Another answered across the building. Then another. It spread through the hotel like echoes passing from room to room. They weren't repairing the building. They were inspecting it. Listening to it. The way a carpenter taps a beam to find rot. Except, it sounded like they were tapping for me. At 1:03 a.m., the humming stopped. Nothing happened for almost 20 minutes. I started convincing myself the worst was over. Then, the doorknob turned. Slowly. Not rattling. Turning. Someone outside my room was trying the handle as gently as possible. The deadbolt held. The knob returned to its original position. A soft knock followed. 3 taps. Exactly like the night before. Then my own voice spoke through the door. Evan. I shut my eyes. Don't answer. You forgot something. Silence. Evan, the cameras aren't recording what you think. Every muscle in my body locked. How could it know about the cameras? I hadn't mentioned them. I hadn't seen anyone all day except Calvin. The voice chuckled. Only, it wasn't quite my laugh. It was too perfect. Too clean. Like someone had reconstructed it from memory. Another voice joined in. Then another. Now there were 3 Evans standing outside my room. Each one speaking with a slightly different version of my voice. One sounded younger. One sounded tired. One sounded exactly like me. We've almost restored you. I backed away from the door. The voices stopped instantly. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I didn't sleep. At 5:41 a.m., sunlight finally reached the eastern ridge. Every sound vanished. By 5:46, birds returned. Wind returned. It was like someone had flipped a switch. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. Dust covered the floor. No footprints. No tool marks. Nothing. I grabbed the DVR units before doing anything else. If the cameras caught even part of last night, I'd finally have proof. I rewound the hotel porch footage first. 11:41 p.m. Motion detected. The porch appeared empty. Then, the image distorted. Not with static. Perspective. The porch seemed longer. The front steps multiplied. 3 became 5. 5 became 7. The camera timestamp kept advancing normally. Nothing entered the frame. Yet the motion detector stayed active. Then, a shadow appeared. Not walking into frame. Growing upward from the porch itself. Like darkness rising out of the wood. Another shadow. Another. Within seconds the porch was crowded. Dozens of human-shaped silhouettes. Every one wearing old-fashioned work clothes. Suspenders. Heavy boots. Hard hats from different eras. None had faces. Just smooth darkness where features should have been. One of them slowly looked directly into the camera. The lens shattered. Recording ended. I checked the actual trail camera. The front glass had cracked from the inside. The main street camera was worse. It showed workers. Hundreds of them. Not ghosts floating through buildings. Construction crews. Surveyors. Bricklayers. Painters. Window installers. Blacksmiths. Every trade imaginable. They moved with terrifying efficiency. Nobody spoke. Nobody hesitated. Entire walls came apart and reassembled within minutes. Scaffolding appeared where none had existed. Stone foundations rebuilt themselves. Fresh paint dried instantly. And every worker cast no shadow. At exactly 3:18 a.m., every one of them stopped. Simultaneously. They all turned toward the camera. Hundreds of featureless faces. Then they walked directly toward it. Recording ended. The camera itself was gone. Only its mounting strap remained. The lobby camera made me physically sick. For hours it showed nothing. Empty chairs. Empty desk. Stillness. Then, at 2:11 a.m., I walked through the lobby. I stared at the screen. No. The timestamp was correct. I had never left my room. But there I was. Same clothes. Same flashlight. Same notebook tucked under my arm. Video Evan calmly unlocked the front door. Opened it. Stepped outside. Closed it behind him. The recording continued for 23 minutes. He never came back. At 2:34. Another me entered through the front door. He looked identical. Except, he was smiling. I have never smiled like that. He looked directly into the camera. Raised one finger to his lips. Then walked upstairs. Toward my room. The recording ended 3 seconds before I heard my own voice outside the door. I played it again. Then again. Frame by frame. Nothing indicated editing. No glitches. No cuts. Either someone had made an impossibly convincing fake, or I'd been downstairs while remembering sitting in my room. That thought stayed with me. Not because I believed it. Because I couldn't completely rule it out. Calvin arrived exactly at 7. He took one look at my face. You watched the recordings. You knew. I suspected. You suspected? The cameras rarely survive. I shoved the DVR toward him. Explain this. He didn't touch it. How long have you worked here? I demanded. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he answered. I arrived in 1998. Doing what? The same job. You restore buildings? I used to. The words landed harder than I expected. Used to? I stopped trying. You've been here 28 years? He nodded once. No. I laughed nervously. No one stays in a ghost town for 28 years. I haven't. What? I've stayed. He looked toward Main Street. For 6 weeks. I frowned. What are you talking about? The town measures time differently. He said it as casually as someone commenting on the weather. My family believes I disappeared 28 years ago. They're wrong? They buried me 17 years ago. I stared at him. He didn't blink. Didn't smile. Didn't seem insane. Just tired. So who are you? He gave me an answer that haunted me long after. I honestly don't know anymore. He finally agreed to show me something. Not because he trusted me. Because, in his words, you've already seen too much. We walked beyond the edge of town. Past the abandoned rail yard. Past the collapsed water tower. Toward an old maintenance warehouse half buried beneath drifting sand. Unlike every other building, this one had chains across the doors. Modern chains. Fresh padlocks. Government property stickers. The chains had been cut recently. Someone had forced entry. Inside, the warehouse smelled different. Not dust. Bleach. Concrete. Electricity. Portable generators lined one wall. Stacks of military storage crates filled another. Someone had turned the warehouse into a field office. Maps of Blackridge covered an entire table. Every street. Every structure. Covered in colored pins. Green. Yellow. Red. The hotel pin was black. What does black mean? Calvin didn't answer. Instead, he opened a steel filing cabinet. Inside were hundreds of personnel files. Architects. Surveyors. Engineers. Historians. Everyone assigned to Blackridge. Everyone listed as status, continuing employment. Dates stretched back to the early 1970s. I pulled one file at random. Daniel Brooks. The owner of the pickup truck. Last seen? No. Not. Last seen. Current assignment. General store restoration. Start date. April 11, 2009. No end date. But his truck's been abandoned for years. Calvin nodded. Probably. Then why does this say he's still working? Because. Calvin looked toward the town through the warehouse window. Blackridge doesn't recognize resignation. At the very back of the cabinet sat a single folder unlike the others. Stamped in faded red ink. Project Foundation. Before I could open it, the warehouse lights flickered. Every radio on the shelves burst into static. Then, all at once, dozens of different voices spoke the exact same sentence. They've noticed you're reading ahead. The radios kept talking after the sentence ended. Not one conversation. Dozens. Some sounded like emergency dispatch. Some sounded military. Others were just frightened people breathing into microphones. Every transmission overlapped the others until they became impossible to separate. Unit 12, pull back. They've reached Oak Street. Sunrise failed. Do not authorize foundation phase. He crossed the. Static swallowed the rest. Every radio died at the exact same moment. The silence afterward was deafening. Calvin closed the filing cabinet so hard the metal echoed through the warehouse. We're leaving. I didn't move. What is Project Foundation? His jaw tightened. I said we're leaving. You've been dodging every question since I got here. And you're still alive. I deserve. No. His voice cracked for the first time. Not angry. Afraid. You deserve another sunrise. We were halfway back to town when I noticed something impossible. The shadows. It was almost noon. The sun sat high over the valley. Every building cast a shadow. Every fence. Every telephone pole. Everyone. Except us. I stopped walking. Calvin took 3 more steps before realizing I'd frozen. What? I pointed. Our shadows. He didn't look. I know. No. My voice came out shaky. Look. I stopped looking years ago. He continued walking. I looked down again. Nothing. The dirt beneath my boots was completely lit. No silhouette. No outline. No matter where I stood. I raised one arm. Nothing changed. My pulse started pounding. When did this happen? Calvin answered without turning around. Most people notice around day 4. I caught up with him. What day is today? He didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, For you? Those 2 words hit harder than anything else he'd said. Back at the hotel I checked my phone again. Still no service. The date displayed. September 18th. That was impossible. I'd arrived on September 15th. 3 days. Right. I opened my work calendar. Every appointment after Blackridge had disappeared. Not cancelled. Gone. Then my phone vibrated. 1 missed voicemail. No signal. No network. Yet somehow. 1 voicemail. The timestamp read. Received 14 years ago. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because my brain couldn't process anything else. I hit play. A woman's voice. Crying. Evan, if this is still your number. Long pause. Dad passed away this morning? My stomach turned. It was my sister. She sounded older. Much older. I know nobody believes you're alive anymore. Her voice broke. But if you are. Static. Please come home. The message ended. I immediately called her number. The phone displayed. Call failed. Then the voicemail vanished. As if it had never existed. That afternoon I decided to ignore Calvin completely. Someone had built that warehouse. Someone had stocked it. Someone had classified those files. That meant there were other people. Government. Military. Contractors. Somebody. I searched the warehouse alone. Hidden beneath a false floor panel I found another room. Concrete walls. No windows. Air conditioning still running. Inside sat 3 enormous steel cabinets labeled Observation Archive. Unlike the personnel files, these weren't about workers. They were about buildings. Each structure in town had its own folder. I opened the hotel file. Thousands of pages. Engineering reports. Historic photographs. Chemical analysis. Blueprints. Then something newer. A printed email. Subject, Replication Event 62. The body contained only 1 sentence. The structure produced another occupant at 2:11. My blood froze. 2:11. The exact time the lobby camera showed. Me. I kept reading. Occupant displayed complete autobiographical memory through approximately 7:40 p.m. previous evening. Behavior indistinguishable from original subject. Termination attempt unsuccessful. Replacement integrated before sunrise. Replacement. Integrated. Before sunrise. My hands started shaking. I searched for my own name. There it was. Evan Mercer. 37 separate reports. 37. I had arrived 3 days ago. Why were there 37 reports? The earliest one was dated tomorrow. I opened it. The report was mostly blacked out. Only fragments remained. Subject believes he is the original. This belief improves compliance. Do not inform subject before cycle 4. Identity collapse causes accelerated integration. The last visible line read: original status remains undetermined. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. Nobody. Then another creak. Closer. Someone was walking across the ceiling. Except there wasn't another floor above this room. Only solid concrete. The footsteps continued anyway. Slow. Heavy. Work boots. A single speck of dust drifted down from the ceiling. Then another. Someone knocked. 3 times. From above the concrete. I backed toward the door. The lights flickered. Every fluorescent bulb dimmed to orange. Then red. The intercom mounted beside the exit crackled. A calm female voice spoke. Replication inspection in progress. I stared at the speaker. Please remain stationary. The voice sounded almost pleasant. Original verification may cause temporary discomfort. Something slammed into the ceiling. Concrete dust rained down. A second impact. Cracks spread across the surface. A third. The ceiling bulged downward. Like someone standing on the floor above was pushing through soft rubber instead of reinforced concrete. Fingers appeared first. Gray. Dust-covered. Human fingers. They slowly pressed through the concrete without breaking it. One hand. Then another. They felt across the ceiling. Searching. I ran. The warehouse hallway stretched far longer than I remembered. Door after door. Office after office. None of them had been there before. Every room contained drafting tables. Architectural models. Blueprints of Blackridge. Only, the town kept changing. One blueprint showed 20 buildings. The next showed 40. Another showed hundreds. One blueprint extended for nearly 30 feet. Blackridge wasn't a town anymore. It was a city. Then, a state. Roads spread beyond the valley. Thousands of identical buildings. Every one carefully labeled. Under restoration. I didn't stop running until I burst outside. Calvin grabbed my shoulders before I even realized he was there. What did you read? I couldn't answer. He looked into my face for only a second. His expression collapsed. You opened your file. I nodded. He whispered one word. Damn. That evening the sky looked wrong. The sunset usually painted the valley orange. Not today. Today. Everything turned pale blue. The same washed-out color as old photographs. Even the sun seemed faded. Calvin stood beside the hotel porch watching it sink. They're changing the cycle. What does that mean? It means... He swallowed. They've stopped repairing buildings. A hammer echoed somewhere across town. Then another. Then hundreds. Only this time. They weren't coming from outside. Every building around us began answering. The hotel walls vibrated. The church bell rang by itself. Windows rattled. Doors opened. Across Main Street. The White House on Oak Street, one that hadn't existed when I arrived, slowly rotated on its foundation until its front door faced me directly. Every light inside turned on. Figures stood behind every window. Motionless. Watching. Calvin whispered. Don't count them. I wasn't. Don't. Of course. The second he said it, my brain tried anyway. 1, 3, 7, 12. No. That wasn't right. The number kept changing every time I blinked. More silhouettes appeared than the house had windows. Some stood upside down on the ceiling. Some seemed impossibly tall. One looked exactly like me. It raised a hand. And waved. Then every other figure in the house waved too. At the exact same time. My radio screamed with static. A voice I recognized immediately came through. My own. Only older. Much older. If you're hearing this. Heavy breathing. Don't let them convince you sunrise saves you. A loud crash. Then the voice continued. Sunrise doesn't reset the town. Another breath. It resets. The transmission dissolved into static. For one split second, a different voice forced its way through. Cold. Mechanical. Almost official. Cycle 4 has begun.